Good afternoon. It's Friday the 26th of February 2021, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Patrick, you'll be glad to know that according to the Office for National Statistics, the number of people with COVID... Perhaps, is 421,300. So that is down. That's down to levels not seen since October last year. But despite that, the message that's being given to school children is no mask, no school. This is pretty much the message that's being given. We've got to wear masks all through classes in the autumn before the schools were closed. You had to wear a mask in communal areas outside of the classroom, but inside the classroom there was no requirement to wear a mask. It's now a requirement to wear a mask at all times.
And that's with children being the least susceptible, according to the authorities, of ever getting, not only ever getting COVID, but ever becoming ill from coronavirus. Isn't that right?
Well, that is correct. And I'm aware of one teacher that was telling their students that the reason for this is because of these new variants, which are much more contagious, and therefore we've got to stop the spread of those, and the masks
I've heard that talking point a lot, Mike.
Yes.
I wonder where they read that. It could have been on the inside of a pub toilet, for all anybody knows,
or a beer mat or something. But look, this is the point. Well, this is one point. I'm finding it quite ironic and quite hypocritical of the schools that they should pursue this policy. Because, of course, the schools have been pursuing this particular narrative for quite some time now. This is all about oceans and plastic in oceans. Apparently we can forget all about plastics in oceans, because now we're teaching our children they've got to wear masks. Of course, they're all using these single-use blue masks, these masks that are full of plastics. We'll come on to that in one second.
Synthetic fibers,
yes.
Petroleum-based products.
Yes, of
mostly,
course,
yeah.
Of course. But they're plastics, and they're microplastics and nanoplastics that are being used in those. First of all, are there any particular health risks? Well, here's a scientific article. COVID-19 face masks, a potential source of microplastic fibers in the environment. This is talking about exactly this issue of plastics in the environment. And if we actually look at many, many other articles, for example, this one, 1.56 billion face masks enter the marine environment in 2020. So the schools are telling the kids they've got to wear face masks. At the same time, they're telling the kids that they've got to contribute to the plastics that are in the environment, which they've already told the children is a very bad thing. So what does this do to the minds of children?
I can tell you it's quite confusing, but let me say, there's not anybody watching this program, Mike, and certainly we've talked about this before. Every step, as soon as you walk out your door now, you see a mask on the pavement, in the parking lot, on the ground, laying there, on the beach, on the seafront. Every single place, people just take them and they chuck them, okay? More than Coke bottles, if you can believe it. More than plastic Coke bottles. So that is the state of play globally right now with masks.
It certainly is. Now, the question then is, what are the health implications? Now, many people focusing on oxygen deprivation, on high levels of CO2 and so on. But the question that I asked 3 or 4 months ago now was, what about fibers? What are the implications of inhaling fibers from masks? Are we in fact creating a new asbestosis epidemic? Now, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not saying that's what is going to happen. I'm asking the question. I'm saying that nobody knows the answer to that. There are some papers out there, for example, this one, need for assessing the inhalation of nanoplastic debris shed from masks, respirators and homemade face coverings during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then let's have a look at this. This is from the University of Edinburgh. I think this was 2018, nanofiber health risk quantified. And they're absolutely talking about the potential for nanofibers of a particular length. The very smallest particles, they say, don't get stuck in the lungs, but they're saying that if they are over a certain length, for example, the types of length that you would see in a face mask, then there's a potential that these get stuck in the lungs. They can't be taken out again, and of course this is potential for lung disease. And here's another one: how damaging is breathing microplastics? This is from the Plastic Soup website, and this is sort of the irony here, because of course we're going to be talking about environmental issues later on, and the fact that the COP meeting is happening in the UK, and the UK absolutely trying to push this climate change environmentalist narrative at the moment. And I'm by no means suggesting that we should ignore plastics in the environment, quite the opposite. But we don't deal with plastics in the environment by requiring the use of plastics on people's faces and having those not being disposed of properly. It's really quite staggering. Now, this report saying that breathing in microplastics is potentially going to create an asbestosis-like risk for people. I would like to see some answers on this. I'm not saying that it's guaranteed that that's going to be the cause, that there's going to be a result from this, but the fact is nobody knows.
You're saying there's hypocrisy here, there's a double standard. There's all this talk about the environment, microplastics. This is a well-tread path, Mike, before the COVID crisis. Then all of a sudden, now that they're pushing compulsory masks, nobody's talking about it.
Well, I'm actually saying more than that. I'm saying that they're trying to run these two narratives in parallel, and they're not compatible with each other. Now, it's interesting you mentioned that, because apparently I hear on the grapevine that David Attenborough was asked about this situation, and you can see his response on screen.
Nothing.
Nothing, indeed.
Didn't happen.
No.
Yeah, he had a big rant on Channel 4. A lot of people might have seen that earlier this week, where he was rounding off about climate change, and this being the sort of the number one threat to humanity at the moment, and that governments are not moving fast enough towards a zero carbon situation, their policy. So we'll get to that a bit later. We'll talk about some of those Green New Deal issues.
Well, indeed, and I'm just going to say it's interesting that some of the same language is being used for both COVID and climate change: zero carbon, zero COVID. And we're going to come up to other examples of this later on in the program. The same types of narratives, the same types of language being used for both these policy agendas.
Not just the language, the same type of people. The same type of people you see pushing zero carbon are generally the same people you'll see pushing zero COVID. So there's a little bit of a pattern there that I think people need to pay very close attention to, and I think it speaks a lot, not only about political ideologies, but also about the underlying agenda and how these two issues, climate change and COVID, and how they converge, and how they're very much converging. Look at the World Economic Forum's website at Davos. Just check out COVID and climate change and look at what they're saying, and you'll see there's an absolute convergence there.
Okay, so what's going on in the world of vaccine passports? I mean, we talked about this on Wednesday, but I'm interested to see what your thoughts are on the subject.
Well, as a lot of people might have seen recently in the news, this topic's coming up. This hashtag is trending on social media, vaccine passports. And lo and behold, what we discovered earlier this week from a Times article, Mike, well, a lot of people, if you worked in government, this is no surprise to you at all. And what we've seen, a little bit of a bait and switch, Mike, as it turns out, the NHS COVID tracking app to be used for the new vaccine passport. What do you think about that, Mike? Isn't that interesting?
I think that there are lots of people in the market at the moment trying to promote their own businesses and trying to promote their own agendas to get in on the contracts that are available for this. But if we look over, for example, track and trace, the UK government was initially very, very keen to use their own technology and be able to gather their own data, and they didn't want to use Apple and Google's technology, for example. They couldn't make it work, so they had to go back and to cap in hand and ask Apple and Google for help. But they are dying to make this a UK government initiative and not be using private companies. So I think it's very, very likely that this is going to end up being rolled into the NHS app.
Well, look, going back to this article here, Mike, what we point out here is there was a number of denials. This question has been asked directly to ministers, not just one, not just two, but multiple ministers repeatedly. does the government have any plans for a vaccine passport? And at each and every turn along the way, the answer has always been a flat no. Let's look at some of the cabinet ministers, what they've said recently when confronted on this very issue, Mike, just weeks before this latest article and this report from the Times has come out, this admission.
So first of all, we've got Gove, and the first part of this is from December, and then we've got a clip from later on. Is that right?
From Nadeem Zawari, the vaccines minister.
Yeah, okay, so Gove first.
Will there be a sort of COVID passport for those who had the vaccine?
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I mean, that's not the plan. What
Do I need to have a vaccine passport in order to go to the pub?
No.
Will I need to?
No.
So that's a pretty definitive no.
Twice.
So then that brings us to the vaccines minister.
Yeah, this is Nadeem Zawari, the vaccines minister, the impressive vaccines minister, according to his cohort. But listen to what he had to say to Sky News recently. This is on, I believe, February 7th, not very long ago.
Are we looking at the possibility of creating them here?
No, we're not. We have, as of yesterday, given the first dose to 11.5 million people. And what they get is a card from their NHS with their name on it, and of course, the date they've been vaccinated with the first dose, and then the date for their second dose. One, we don't know the impact of the vaccines on transmission. Two, it would be discriminatory, and I think the right thing to do is to make sure that people come forward, be vaccinated because they want to, rather than it being made in some way mandatory through a passport. Or otherwise, if other countries obviously require some form of proof, then you can ask your GP, because your GP will hold the record. And of course, that will then be able to be used as your proof that you've had the vaccine. But we are not planning to have a passport in the UK. I just want to repeat that because I've had a lot of it on my social media. There are small startup technology companies that have had some funding from UKRI and Innovate UK who are looking at apps in this area, but we are certainly not looking to introduce it as part of the vaccine deployment program.
Well, that's pretty clear. Now, people in the chat box suggesting that politicians tend to lie. I wonder why anybody would believe him. Now, is it just me, Patrick, or is he very reminiscent of Anton LaVey?
Well, there's a physical resemblance there.
Yes.
The point is this, though, when you look at those two denials by these two ministers, is when they say there is no plans to X, okay, or that's not in the plan, as Gove said many times, that means that they are planning to do it. And if they're planning to do it, it means they're intending to do it. Yeah. So at what point have we not learned the lesson after all of these years that ministers, politicians, they do lie, and they do obfuscate, and they do this daily. In fact, that is probably one of the only professional requirements in modern politics, is that you can and you will and you do lie repeatedly all the time. That's basically what they do. They never give their hand away until the agenda is already on the tracks and moving forward. And hence, this is why there's so much aggression with regards to censorship. I mean, if you talked about vaccine passports like 12 months ago, when people were talking about it, you're being accused of being a conspiracy theorist.
That is true, and accusation was thrown at us for doing exactly that. Spreading
fear, and now look, it's policy. So wake up, people. Okay, this is happening. This is absolutely happening. Now let's look at how to operationalize this particular policy. This is a story that's also come out this week. This is up at 21st Century Wire. Now, this is our opinion at 21st Century Wire. The UK and Greece have colluded to push this new vaccine passport on holiday travelers. Look at the situation here, Mike. You have a demand, okay? You have a supply issue, okay? What is in supply? What is in short supply right now? It's freedom, okay? So freedom is in short supply. And so you have a demand. What is the demand? For people to want to travel, for people to want to go on vacation, to go to other countries. So you have governments are controlling, absolutely controlling the supply and the demand in this equation, okay? The supply is freedom and your rights, or what they call privileges, and the demand is the demand to, go on holiday, to travel.
Well, there's the demand to go on holiday to travel from individuals. There's a demand from the airlines and the hospitality industry that
Correct.
people are allowed to travel. And so what they're doing is building a situation where there is going to be, people are going to be actually saying to the government at this point, who are saying, well, we've got no plans. The government, people are going to be saying to them, well, why have you no plans? We demand you give us vaccine passports.
Right, so there's a lot of pressure right now.
Yes.
Political pressure, social pressure, economic pressure for a, quote, solution. Okay, they've created the problem, the reaction is obvious, and the solution, well, they've been working on the solution, despite the denials of Michael Gove and the impressive vaccine minister, Nadim Zawari. So let's go back and look at this story here. So this is what's happening. Now, we'll break down some of the details here, the mechanism that's going to make this work vis-a-vis the European Union, okay? This is a three-way sort of deal. This is a three-way con, as you might call, a short con that's being played on the public. Let's listen to the tourism minister from Greece. He spoke to ITV. Just a couple of days ago, and he basically laid this out very casually. But yes, he has been working hand in hand. They've been talking to the UK government behind the scenes. And I might add, Mike, there at no point has there been any public consultation, any legal or judicial review on this policy. They're literally trying to push the policy by fiat, by administrative fiat, by having various countries sign up to it, and then basically roll it out, and then wait for the challenges afterwards. Where is the democracy? Where is the consultation? Any of this?
Long gone.
So let's listen to the Greece tourism minister here talking to ITV.
We feel that the vaccination programs are a game changer, together with the abundance of tests, rapid tests and PCR tests. So we feel that vaccination means that someone with the required certificate that will be issued by the government means that you do not need to have a negative test before you fly, like the current requirements stipulate. But it doesn't mean that only vaccinated people can travel. We still have the option of a negative test for anyone who's not yet in the vaccination program. Well, we have, from the start, from the design of our vaccination program, which was very digital in terms of the appointment making and everything, we would actually proactively send SMS messages to our citizens with a pre-booked appointment. So you can imagine that all this is very, very digital in nature. And we have created vaccination certificates. Actually, I have one with me, which show that someone is vaccinated, and it has 3 digital modes of verification. It has a QR code, it has a signature, and it has a URL which you can verify. So this can all be done automatically. I'm sure the UK, the discussions, as I said, they're still ongoing, and there's still some way to go. I'm sure that the UK has something equivalent to be able to automate as much as possible of the process. But if paper is also part of the process, it will be part of the process. We cannot change that.
I mean, this is really important, Patrick, because what is being built here is a global digital identity program scheme system.
Using the virus, using the pandemic as the pretext.
Yes.
On 100%, clearly.
Yes. Most of the discussion of this is around the idea that it can't be left in the hands of one organization to manage this global digital identity, because one organization isn't going to be big enough to cope with the demand. So there are going to have to be frameworks established and corporations right around the world using those frameworks. It's a real technocratic infrastructure that's being built.
Yeah, a global, ubiquitous infrastructure. Notice a couple of things he said that's really important. He said that, don't worry, if you don't have a vaccine passport, it's okay, it's okay. That's the way ITV wrote their headline, by the way. Very deceptive, saying you don't need a vaccine passport to go to Greece, says tourism minister. I wish we could flash the headline up, but you can go online and find it. And so, but what they omit in that headline, Mike, when you read the fine print and you listen to the other half of the interview here, he's saying, or you can have a negative COVID test. And he said, we'll be using the PCR test as well, maybe a bunch of tests. Who knows what they're going to use? So totally unstandardized, using the absolutely diabolical PCR test, the most inaccurate diagnostic tool you could possibly use. And so this idea that you either have to test negative with a dodgy test, okay, or you have to have a vaccine passport to enter the country. I mean, is there anything in international law that prohibits the restriction of free movement amongst free countries as a right? I do believe that some of these things, having to consent or voluntarily go into a medical procedure, it's a choice to have a medical procedure, be it a vaccine or sticking a swab right up your nasal cavity, okay, in order to test you for something, and meanwhile has nothing to do with whether you're healthy or not. You could be perfectly healthy, could have never gotten sick, and you're in your prime, you're looking after yourself, but no, you will not be allowed to enter certain countries unless you have this vaccine passport or you test negative. And how long, Mike, until the negative COVID test just becomes auxiliary and really everybody's going to be required to have this, quote, immunity passport or health passport or vaccine passport, whatever you want to call it?
The only reason that they are at this point stepping back from requiring vaccines only is because the vaccine program, particularly in the EU, hasn't been rolled out widely enough. We're going to be coming on to that a little bit later. As soon as that vaccine program is universal and everybody has the opportunity, and it then becomes a choice whether you have it or not, then they'll remove the option, I believe, for the test.
We'll go back to the article here. Let's look at the bottleneck they've created. Well, what has it done? Here you go, Mike. Now it's pressuring Brussels to move quicker on the issue and thus bypass due process and legal considerations on the issue of vaccine passports. You see what they've done here? Created this time limit where we're coming towards spring. People are all booking their holidays now. Look at the headlines in the papers. Record holiday bookings, for the summer. And so everybody wants to know. They need certainty in order to book their holidays. So they've created a problem, reaction, solution situation almost with a time limit on it. And they're pushing. The UK and Greece effectively are pressuring the EU to move quicker on the issue. So this is global Britain, bilateral Britain, doing a bilateral deal with Greece. You'd think Greece had learned after the 2008 financial crisis
to stay away from us.
Not to capitulate to external pressures, but it seems like they haven't learned their lesson. So Greece is just a very easy target in that sense. But where's the proof on this? Well, it's right here. Here's the Financial Times. Greece presses EU to move more quickly on vaccine passports. That's just from yesterday or the day before, within the last couple of days, this story. So you can see the mechanism here. You can see the mechanism. This is multiple countries, in this case, the UK and Greece, and there's a few other countries as well that are pushing this. And so they're normalizing the policy. And as soon as they get Brussels to move with them on this, or to capitulate to the public pressure, because Spain needs the tourism dollars, right? Greece needs the tourism dollars, right? Who else needs them? Italy needs them as well. Everybody's desperate for tourism euros and dollars and pounds over the summer period, and so they need to move fast. So everything's about speed and centralization of policy, Mike. This is how we got into this mess with COVID, and now they're compounding the problems by adding all of these new dictatorial draconian policies because we can't wait. We can't wait. So everything's about there's no alternative, there is no alternative, and we can't wait. We must act together now as one, like a rapid reaction response mechanism.
Yes. So what's Blair been up to then?
Well, behind every bad policy, Mike, behind every bad policy, you'll normally see this ghoul here. There he is. And, we still have to suffer this man. And so look at vaccine passports. Who's pushing this? Who's directing? Who's coordinating this? All along, it has been Tony Blair. Okay, it is Blair. There we go, from January. And this is just one of many from the Tony Blair Institute here. Tony Blair calls on Boris Johnson to lead the drive for global vaccine passports. The former prime minister has called current border restrictions disjointed and urged the UK to put a global travel pass on the G7 agenda to use its rotating presidency position on the upcoming G7 summit. Use that special position, this great opportunity. So here we go. Britain is in the cat seat, going into the G7, all this pressure for a vaccine passport. Tony Blair is architecting it from behind the scenes, making sure that the Labour Party and Keir Starmer are like good little boys there in the front row, ready to do whatever the teacher says on this issue. And so this has already been decided. This policy is so well formulated right now. And the press are acting like, oh, it's a surprise. We don't know if we're going to do it. Gove said he has no plans to do it. And then he turns around in the Times this week, and as we showed you earlier, we find out that actually they are very much working on it. He's reviewing it for Boris Johnson.
That's very generous of him.
He said, I've tasked Michael Gove to review the issue of vaccine passports. We're reviewing it. No, they're absolutely planning on rolling it out. We've showed you just a smidgen of the evidence here. If you really want to go dig into this, you'll see there's a waterfall of evidence that this is already in motion. It's been on the books for a long time, and they're using COVID, they're using the vaccines, they're using your summer holiday in order to ram it down your throats, literally.
Okay, well, look, let's move on to the yellow card system from the MHRA and the adverse reactions that are coming out of this. So this is the latest release from the MHRA on the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. We're seeing a wide range of adverse reactions as expected, cardiac arrests, cardiorespiratory arrests, some deaths as a result of that. They do manage to get their maths correct after the first effort on this. So we now know that there were 90 total deaths, just defined as death without any other explanation, which resulted in 90 fatalities. So at least they got the numbers right this time, in the sense that they tally, not necessarily that they're the right actual numbers. So for the Pfizer-BioNTech, the MHRA is claiming that there have been 77,207 adverse reactions recorded so far from 26,823 reports. And 197 fatalities. Now, that number seems very low to most people, bearing in mind that there have been several million vaccines rolled out. But of course, vaccines are very special because whereas with COVID, if you die, if you're a COVID statistic, a COVID death statistic, and you have underlying comorbidities, then those are ignored for the purposes of COVID.
So you died because of COVID.
Not because of a comorbidity, but with respect to the vaccine, you die from the comorbidity and not the vaccine. Right. So it gets a special status.
So they blame COVID, but don't blame the vaccine on the death. And this is the same. Are these the same vaccines they want they want loaded into your vaccine passport, Mike?
Yes.
The very same ones. This is interesting, isn't it?
So let's have a look at the AstraZeneca one. And actually, interestingly enough, AstraZeneca seems to have caused quite a bit of COVID. So 108 COVID infections caused by the vaccine, according to the yellow card scheme, 10 deaths there. They also have deaths and sudden deaths with no other explanation. And in this case, the 111 deaths. So actually the AstraZeneca jab, which was behind in the first week of reports, now that we're in the third week, is ahead. So 205 total fatalities from 114,625 adverse events. So, but let's try to put a little bit of context on this, because if we look at the latest excess mortality figures from the Office for National Statistics, and we look at what's been going on in care homes. If you look on the right-hand side of that care home drive, let's just zoom in a little bit on this. Look at the right-hand side of that care home, the excess mortality from care homes there, and you see that pretty much as soon as the vaccine program, the vaccine rollout in care homes was finished, the excess mortality seems to have fallen again. It's all very coincidental. We can't say that the cause of the excess mortality was the vaccines, because we don't know, but it's certainly very coincidental that the excess mortality in care homes rose sharply as soon as the vaccine rollout began, and seems to have fallen sharply again as soon as the vaccine rollout was complete. And we know that it was complete because carehome.co.uk has told us that it was. This was on the 27th of January, saying 95% of care homes in England have had all residents vaccinated already. So that's quite interesting.
Well, there's multiple variables going on here, so this would require a little more investigation. But certainly this is a good entry point into sort of really looking at those statistics and looking at the outcome of the mass vaccination program on the elderly.
Well, that's true, Patrick, but actually, because we're not really doing any proper investigation of what actually caused the deaths of people in care homes, we're not doing any kind of post-mortem. Same as with people that are dying in hospitals, we're not doing any sort of post-mortem. We're simply relying on the PCR test to tell us whether that person was COVID positive or not. So we're actually never going to get to the truth about how these people died. We can only ask questions and say that really there should be an inquiry here. But that inquiry hasn't happened. There's no data being gathered. And so it's going to be very, very difficult at the end of the day to say exactly what happened.
And this is a big problem in the United States. We have the VAERS reporting system for adverse reactions for vaccines. The problem with the VAERS system as well is that not all medical professionals are compelled to report everything into that system. So, and this has been detailed in great job by Children's Health Defense, Robert F. Kennedy's website, basically saying how the policy of reporting has changed drastically over the years. In fact, it's very underreported. So adverse reactions and deaths, like you said, there needs to be a proper investigation, proper post-mortem. That's not happening. So the numbers that we're seeing reported could possibly only be a fraction of the real numbers, and that should really be of great concern to people. I think it should be a great concern to the media, to public health officials, but nobody wants to know. Anything to do with vaccines, nobody wants to know. It's like, move along, nothing to see here.
This is totally correct. Now, of course, if we go back to this excess mortality graph from the Office for National Statistics, and of course this is based on where the death happened. There is one area where we can say that there's something is identifiable, and that is the number of people that are dying in their own homes. And it's quite interesting to me, Patrick, that whereas in care homes, in hospitals, in other settings, we saw a reduction in the excess mortality to the point where the overall mortality was falling below the 5-year average during the summer months in 2020. It has never fallen below the 5-year average in private homes. And this is the effect of lockdown. This is a combination of people not getting proper hospital treatment. Their cancer treatment's been stopped. They're having strokes and heart attacks. They're not going to hospital quickly enough. This is also the effect of suicide. Of course, we don't know how many suicides are in among that excess mortality because that isn't being, or it isn't being gathered properly, or at least the inquiries aren't happening fast enough that we can actually get some useful statistics from this. So this graph here, this issue has never been addressed by the mainstream press. It hasn't been addressed by the fact checkers either. Let's see them address this. Let's see the answer for why we're having this constant excess mortality from the beginning of the pandemic right until the present day, with no reduction for the summer months, as we saw in other settings.
At home excess mortality as well, yes. I mean, that's an obvious gaping hole there in the narrative that needs to be further investigated.
Yes. Now, of course, the issue of vaccine hesitancy is one that's in the press regularly in the UK, and it's largely being put at the door of the black and ethnic minority groups, because they're particularly hesitant, apparently. But it's not quite the same in Europe. Here's just one example. This is Belgium. And Belgium has an amazing vaccination centre. It can deal with 5,000 people a day And, well, they're not really getting anybody through.
They've got the manufacturing facilities there as well for Pfizer, don't they?
They do. And so we've got this headline from Euronews: Belgium's slow rollout absurd with so many vaccines made in the country. It is an incredible situation this is a real photograph. They've got all the chairs set out for people to be socially distanced and nobody in them.
At Brussels Airport, Mike, Brussels International Airport.
The BBC was talking about this yesterday on the lunchtime news programme, and they were saying, or their commentator from Brussels was saying that 5,000 people per day is what the centre can do. They're lucky if they get 200 or 300 people through. So there's no particular explanation for why that is. But I think it's also interesting, Patrick, that I just saw before we came onto the programme that only about 30% of the people that are working in care homes in the UK are taking up the opportunity to get the vaccine as well. So this issue, this sales pitch that's going on over vaccines doesn't seem to be getting traction.
It's because a lot of it's not a sales pitch. They're literally pushing it very aggressively. I mean, you talk about corporate drug pushers.
Yes.
This is what Big Pharma is doing. And I might add, I was speaking to someone in France this week, and they said a lot of people weren't talking about wanting to get this vaccine, but as soon as the press started repeating these stories about shortages for weeks, all of a sudden you heard more people saying, oh, I want to get one.
Demand.
Yeah, so they created artificial scarcity through the media, through reporting, and again, the government is totally in control of that process. As we said earlier, they control supply and demand of everything, along with these corporations who they're working very, very tightly and closely with.
Yes.
And so they can alter public opinion just by creating these situations.
Earlier in the week and last week, we were talking about this issue of no jab, no job. Would people be mandated to get a vaccine if they wanted to keep their jobs? We made the point that certainly that Chris Whitty was aiming or suggesting that would be the case for healthcare workers. But in fact, to receive healthcare now, it's becoming a requirement, it seems, because more and more anecdotal evidence. Here's just one tweet from Andy Richards saying, my wife needs to have an operation on her spine, and she's been told she has to have a vaccine and 2 negative tests. She has underlying conditions, but was originally told she shouldn't have the vaccine as once she had a bad reaction to the swine flu jab. And this certainly was the case, that there was a statement early as the vaccines were being rolled out initially, that if people had bad reactions to previous vaccines, then they should be very, very careful about having these ones. So this is now a requirement to receive medical treatment. I think that is potentially a much bigger ethical question than jobs, actually.
Well, so you have a potential of this, and we'll just lay this out, Mike, the last thing I'll say here on this issue of vaccines and vaccine passports. So restricting your access to venues, pubs, restaurants, whatnot, could be public transport hubs. Who knows how far would it go? Education. Will you get access to university? Will you be able to go on campus? Will children be able to go to school? Of course, we talked about international travel, but let's take that a step further. Supermarkets to buy food. Will you be allowed entry into Sainsbury's, for instance? They're particularly militant on their mask policies, okay? But let's take it further. Will you be allowed access to health care?
Well, the answer is, we've just seen the answer, that is increasingly the case. More and more reports of that. We will not be allowed access to healthcare.
Look at the paradox of that issue right there. And then ask yourself a question, what exactly are we doing here?
Yes.
What exactly are we doing?
Okay, if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please join us. You can do so at ukcolumn.org/community, and that would be very much appreciated. And also, please share our material on the various platforms if you can.
And some alternative video platforms there, Mike. They're very interesting. You've got BitChute, but you've also got Odyssey as well.
Yes.
So they're really interesting. There's some great material on some of these other video sharing platforms. So we do encourage people to go explore, not just the UK Column, but there's other great content on there as well.
For sure.
So it's really exciting to see some of these other video sharing platforms coming into their own.
Yes. Okay. BBC, Patrick, let's have a look at this. COVID, why can't we unlock more quickly?
Yes, we don't often go to the BBC, Mike, for wisdom and news and things like this, and I accidentally pulled this article up, and normally I have a reaction, a sort of something
An adverse reaction?
something akin to nausea when I see their work, but I just went a little further. I was so intrigued, Mike, by the headline that I went down further. So this just give you a little extrapolate, a little masterclass here on BBC propaganda, because it's just reaching levels that nobody's ever seen before. So here's the headline here: COVID. Why can't we unlock more quickly? This is the question on everybody's mind, isn't it? And this is by Nick Triggle, the health correspondent there. Nick Triggle, and as you can see, there's hipsters there with an attractive blonde there over a pint of beer. So there was
not a very realistic picture, it has to be said.
Well, yeah, it could be in Portobello or something like that, I'm sure, or down in Bermondsey in London. But how soon can we get back to normal? How soon can we have these scenes where you can just sit together with people and have a pint? That's the question. Let's look at what the BBC has to say, the wisdom behind the BBC on this. And this is what we find straight off the bat in this article by Mr. Triggle. And there can be no more steps backwards. Oh, we heard Boris Johnson saying this as well, didn't we? That all these steps must be irreversible, right? Well, here we go. A key mantra in the lead up to the announcement is that each step forward must be irreversible. There must be no steps back. This is the BBC talking, Mike, okay? What exactly would you call this? Because it's not news, it's not analysis. What exactly is this?
Propaganda.
That's right. This is propaganda. We just thought we'd put that right up front, but that's not all. They keep going. Let's look at what else is here. This is a beauty. But despite, listen to this, talk about doublespeak. Despite falling infection rates, the number of new daily cases still remains relatively high. So in one sentence, you have falling infection rates, but raising cases. Isn't this amazing, Mike? Is this not designed to just absolutely bamboozle the reader and leave them in a paralytic state of shock, okay, compared to the summer and early autumn? So it is still a very delicate position. So they're saying that you should expect the same level of cases in the winter as you do the summer. This is what the BBC, so they're ignoring seasonality as a variable. That's something Neil Ferguson did in his great lockdown computer modeling, which we'll show in a little bit. But this is the graph they threw out here. Look at this, Mike. So they're saying that, all seasons are equal with regards to seasonal respiratory virus. So this is the sort of tripe that the BBC is putting out even today. And you look at this with absolute wonder how manipulative this media outlet is on COVID here. So clearly this is the health correspondent who is in charge of proofreading his reports. We don't know, but we'll go a little bit further. What else does Mr. Triggle have to say? Well, he's thrown up this graph, Mike. This is quite an interesting graph. Under 70s make up a small proportion of those who have died with, being the operative word, with COVID-19, but about half of those admitted to hospital. So look, he's shown this disparity here, Mike, that young people aren't dying of COVID, but they're filling up the hospital beds with COVID. So what are we talking about
Or
here?
are they filling up the hospital beds with all kinds of other problems? But a PCR test has said that at some point they may have come into contact with the virus. Is that what's going on?
Bingo, you win the prize, Mike. But unfortunately, you're not playing at the BBC. So again, the readers are none the wiser. Let's move on here. We're trying to figure out why lockdown should be done slower. Schools could drive up infection rates. That's a pretty powerful statement, isn't it, Mike? Schools could drive up infection rates. But then you read it and it says schools are not considered a significant driver of infection. And that's in one sentence right there. So cases still fell in November when England was in lockdown, but schools remained opened. So classic doublespeak. Again, this article is literally littered with all of these contradictory statements, one after another. And this is the head health honcho at the BBC, Mr. Treacle. So infections plus vaccines equals ideal breeding ground for mutations. So, look, Mike, they're drifting it out, aren't they? Here, let's take a look. at the logic and the science here at the BBC, mutations are to be expected. Growing levels of immunity, he's talking about from vaccines, from the further rollout of the vaccine will favor variants that can sneak past the vaccine.
Oh, they're sneaky.
So COVID is able to sneak past the vaccine, according to the health czar at the BBC, Mr. Treacle. Okay, so there we go. So, but what are they really saying there, Mike? They're really saying that, almost admitting that you might expect more sicknesses as a result of the vaccine.
Well, they're certainly saying that there's going to be new variants, and of course, new variants are the gift that keep on giving because they allow all kinds of policy decisions to be made.
Sure, especially vaccine-derived variants, and that's not a conspiracy theory. Just go look up, do a Google search if you're at home right now. Type in, how about this? Type in WHO, Africa, polio vaccines, vaccine-derived virus. People are dying in Africa because of the vaccine-derived polio virus. Well, not just in Africa. This has happened in India, I think in Pakistan too, number of African countries. And so that's just the polio vaccine. I think you can probably find some other examples of this as well. So again, this is very interesting. We're just trying to help you read between the lines with regards to propaganda. So where does this naturally lead logically? Well, let's look at Nature magazine. So this is the flip side of this argument here. The coronavirus is here to stay, and here's what that means. This is Nature magazine here, and this is what they're saying. And they're saying that if other regions aided by vaccines aimed for a similar zero COVID strategy, then could the world hope to rid itself of the virus? They're talking about the idea of zero COVID, Mike. Okay, and here's what they're saying, Nature. It's a beautiful dream, but most scientists think it's improbable. Really, I think impossible is probably a better word for this. So this is Nature magazine, preeminent science journal here, basically saying, along with a lot of other people, Mike, that zero COVID is a pipe dream. But yet governments are talking about it like it's going to be policy. Australia is attempting this, New Zealand, and really extremist leadership in these countries, the Antipodean countries, pursuing a zero COVID policy. Meanwhile, the scientists are saying, no, it's impossible. What are you doing? You got
Well, some scientists are, the scientists that are associated with SAGE and SAGE-like organizations seem to be pushing, so the usual suspects seem to be pushing zero, COVID zero.
The SAGE lot, and they're not all very well qualified, as we'll show you in a minute.
Later. Yes, but look, thanks for Hugo Talks for tipping us off to this one, but this is the Independent Scientific Advocacy Group in Ireland. A better way forward toward elimination of COVID-19, and they've got a nice little badge there that you can put on your website. We can be zero. So it's all about COVID zero.
Yeah, zero rights, zero liberties, zero life,
yes,
zero work, zero economy, zero health.
That's what it means. So the Independent Scientific Advisory Group, Advocacy Group in Ireland, they call themselves a multidisciplinary group of scientists, academics and researchers who've come together to advocate for SARS-CoV-2 elimination strategy for the island of Ireland. Well, anyway, Hugo Talks was highlighting this article from an Irish website called Gript. That's GRIPT. The headline is "Look for ways to increase insecurity, anxiety and uncertainty, zero COVID document." So it looks like the policy of the SPI-B group, the SPI-B subgroup of SAGE in the UK, is creeping across into other countries.
Look at this graphic. This is a COVID on an iron ball and chain shattering the back of someone's head.
Yes.
That's not a pleasant image.
So according to Gript, the Independent Scientific Advisory Group were instructed to review and internalize instructions to look for ways to increase insecurity, anxiety and uncertainty, and to go after people and not institutions, because people hurt faster than institutions.
Can you repeat that, please?
They were instructed to review and internalize instructions to look for ways to increase insecurity, anxiety and uncertainty, and to go after people and not institutions, because people hurt faster than institutions. So that's absolutely clear. This is absolute the use of applied psychology to increase the levels of fear in people in order to pursue this zero COVID agenda.
And to go after individuals who
Yes.
are dissenting? Is that what they're saying?
No, just to make sure that
generally-
individuals in general their anxiety is raised, their fear is raised, because that way they are susceptible to the message. So I'll just quote a little bit more here. The note reminded ISAG members of the importance of ridicule as man's most powerful weapon, and that the threat of a thing is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. ISAG members, many of whom are regular guests in Irish media, were told that they could count on imagination and dream up as many more consequences than they themselves, as the threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. So that's a bit of a repeat, but nonetheless, they were also promoting, guess what, Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. So this is from their internal chat box, this particular screen grab. And they were all being reminded, I know the text is very small there, but it's just because it is a screenshot from the actual chat, the list of 13 rules for radicals that Saul Alinsky had published in his book being promoted, and these types of techniques being used to drive fear in the Irish community.
How to be a disruptive change agent.
Yes.
So this is weaponized, basically activism. This is
Totally, yes.
disruptive politics.
Yes.
That's just should make everybody feel really warm and fuzzy at home.
Well, but the point is, once we know that they're doing this stuff, then we know what to look out for, and it basically pulls its claws, as it were.
So they're playing dirty, basically.
They're very much so.
I didn't realize government did that, Mike. That's absolutely shocking.
But of course, one of the faces of this whole policy is the wonderful Neil Ferguson.
Well, we have to ask ourselves, how did we get here to begin with? And let's look at some of these experts. Well, this is the Grand Poobah himself, Dr. Lockdown Neil Ferguson from Imperial College fame, one of Boris Johnson's most consequential advisors. Do you think that's a fair statement?
Could be.
One of the most consequential science advisors in modern history, okay? This is the guy right here. But this is what we found out recently, Imperial Folly. Neil Ferguson has no qualification in biological sciences. Now that might come as a shock to some people, maybe not from others, looking at his work. But this was really serialized by a piece that was originally in Lockdown Skeptics, okay, by, I believe, Derek Winton. And this is what they found. In an interview on the BBC's Life Science, Ferguson conceded to not having an A-level in biology. Now that might be a little bit shocking, wouldn't it? Well, it gets a little bit more interesting. As far as publicly available information is accurate, he appears to have no formal training in computer modeling. This is the thing that he's most famous for. Medicine, of course not, and epidemiology either. He's listed, Mike, on Imperial College's website as leading epidemiologists in the UK, okay? One of the country's leading epidemiologists. Constantly, he's being referred to as the top epidemiologist, but yet he has no formal education or training in epidemiology whatsoever. I don't even think in biostatistics either. So not great. So the computer model which Ferguson used to invent the outlandish death predictions was not even fit for purpose. Among other problems, it completely left out seasonality as a variable in projecting the progress of the pandemic. Now you'd think if somebody with some biological sciences background would have known to put seasonality in as a variable in their computer model so as not to have overblown death counts, like 500,000 deaths or something like this. But of course, Neil Ferguson left that out of his model, which shows a level of incompetency. So incompetent, incapable, and unqualified. That is the most consequential science advisor to any government in modern history, that man, Neil Ferguson. So that is the pandemic in a nutshell.
Well, let's just remind ourselves of what Lockdown Skeptics, I mean, we reported this at the time. Lockdown Skeptics ran a code review of Ferguson's model. So it isn't the code Ferguson ran to produce his most famous Report 9, is what they say. This was from May 2020. What's been released on GitHub is a heavily modified derivative of it, having been upgraded for over a month by a team from Microsoft and others. So just to remind ourselves, Microsoft and others had to take his code. They had to spend a month working on it to get it into a state that was fit for public release.
Sanitize it.
That's absolutely sanitize it. The revised code base is split into multiple files for legibility and written in C++, where the original program was written a single 15,000 line file that had been worked on for a decade. And they're making the point this is bad practice. It goes on to say that due to bugs, the code can produce very different results given identical inputs. They routinely act as if this is unimportant. And then I think the last paragraph is particularly of note here. On a personal level, the author says, I'd go further and suggest that all academic epidemiology be defunded. This sort of work is best done by the insurance sector. Insurers employ modelers and data scientists, but also employ managers whose job is to decide whether a model is accurate enough for real-world usage, and professional software engineers to ensure model software is properly tested, understandable, and so on. Academic efforts don't have these people, and the results speak for themselves. I think that's absolutely valid criticism.
So this is an interesting point, isn't it, Mike, that in the insurance sector, they can't afford to get it wrong, can they, in terms of actuaries? I mean, if they do, they're literally out of business.
Yes.
So there's a more rigorous and robust process in auditing things like modeling and predictive modeling in the private sector. In the insurance sector specifically, one of the things that they excel at. And in the world of academia, you're saying, well, it seems, Mike, that there's none.
No, there's none.
There's none. So there's no incentive or no pressure to make it more robust, to sort of plug all of the bugs and problems with it. They're literally just making it up as they go along. It looks impressive. Certainly the results were enough to really, really impress Boris Johnson and his ministers, so much so that they decided to go full Wuhan on the country, and the rest is history.
Yes.
But look, we've traced it back. We've shown you who this, quote, expert is. We've shown you his computer modeling and what's behind it, and guess what? It's a complete catastrophe, okay? It's a total debacle. And is he still on SAGE's committee?
I'm not sure whether he's back or not. Of course, he lost his job because he was busy meeting and dallying with his girlfriend.
I think he's back.
Yes, I think he.
Reports recently have indicated that he is back in the fold.
Yes. Well, look, let's move on then. And I just wanted to, this is from December actually, but I wanted to bring it up because the question of PCR testing and the validity of PCR testing, which has driven everything that we've seen, including the numbers of deaths attributed to COVID-19. And this is from Science magazine. The coronavirus may sometimes slip its genetic material into human chromosomes, but what does this mean? People, they're saying that basically the people who have recovered from COVID-19 sometimes later test positive for SARS-CoV-2, suggesting their immune systems could not ward off a second attack of the coronavirus, or that they had a lingering infection. But a study now hints at a different explanation in which the virus hides in an unexpected place. The work, only reported in preprint, suggests the pandemic pathogen takes a page from other retroviruses and integrates its genetic code, but importantly just parts of it, into people's chromosomes. And of course that would then be detectable subsequently. And in fact, if it was integrated into people's chromosomes, that would mean potentially someone was testing positive for SARS-CoV-2 in perpetuity. So
forever.
Yes, so you would never be able to get into Greece because you would never be able to get a negative test result, and perhaps you wouldn't be able to get medical treatment because you wouldn't be able to get a negative test result. So it's quite important to understand this, and what's quite interesting is that this really doesn't seem to have been taken up by anybody since then. But putting this back on screen, they quote this man, David Baltimore, from the California Institute of Technology. He's won a Nobel Prize, if I remember correctly, and he has said because it is all pieces of the coronavirus genome. It can't lead to infectious RNA or DNA, and therefore it's probably biologically a dead end. So he's making it clear that there's no possibility of infection if this if these mRNA strands from the SARS-CoV-2 virus end up in your within your DNA.
From the vaccine you're talking about?
No, this
just
is from,
naturally.
This is naturally.
Right,
Yes.
okay.
Yes. And so if anybody's interested in reading the paper and would like to distribute this a little bit, because I think questions need to be asked here. The title is SARS-CoV-2 RNA reverse transcribed and integrated into the human genome. They're all US-based scientists, as far as I know, and it's a very interesting thing. So it might raise some further questions among some people that are paying attention. I'm not going to say any more than that at this point.
But the bottom line with the PCR test is that the biggest misconception out in the public, if you polled 100 people, probably like 80 or 90 of them will say that I thought that the PCR test had a copy of the novel coronavirus, the virus, and that they're matching that to the virus in your blood or in your nasal swab or whatever. And that when it gets a perfect match, then you're a positive. Most people think that's how the test works.
No.
But that's not how the test works. No, the test doesn't have a full copy of the virus. It has a few genetic sequences, what markers you might call them, RNA markers, and then it expands through the PCR transcription method to blow up the number of DNA molecules until it has a match, okay? And so that doesn't mean it's got the full virus. So in other words, some of those genetic strands, Mike, are actually in your body normally.
That's true too.
They're in lots of your cells. So they're not unique to the quote novel coronavirus. This is on the testing end, and think about that. If the testing is that inaccurate, and by the way, the inventor of the test, Kary Mullis, Nobel laureate himself, said that my test, the PCR, should never be used as a diagnostic, and yet what have we done since day one?
Used it as a diagnostic.
Used it as a diagnostic. I rest my case, Your Honor.
Yeah, okay, well, let's move on to censorship. And, well, look, here is the Joint Development Foundation. This is really, they're helping specification development projects. This is kind of an incubator, if you like, and it's got some big tech names behind it. And they have just put some money into a new program, which is being backed by Adobe, ARM, BBC, Intel, Microsoft, and TruePic. They're forming a coalition to develop end-to-end open standards for tracing the origin and evolution of digital content. That's good. It's going to take this little group. This is a Content Authenticity Initiative from Adobe, creating the standard for digital content attribution, and they're going to mix it up with this, which is Project Origin, which is from the BBC mainly, which is all about misinformation and the growing threat to the integrity of the information ecosystem. They're going to mix all this up, and they're going to provide a mechanism for platforms to preserve and read the provenance of digital content, all with a view to deciding whether it's trustworthy or not and labeling it as such.
Let me guess. So the BBC is in charge of this. So I guess all BBC content won't ever be audited. It's just automatically assumed to be trustworthy, right?
Oh, how could you be so cynical?
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
And that goes for CNN and Washington Post and all the other brands that you saw on that little project.
Yes. Now, weaponizing transhumanism. This is what we're going to label this little segment. This is all about transhumanism, and it's an article which has appeared in the NATO Review. Now, the NATO Review, of course, is a comment. It's not NATO's policy. It's other people pushing policy in NATO's direction. So this article has appeared: Cognitive Biotechnology Opportunities and Considerations for the NATO Alliance. So let's just have a look at some of the things it says. Advances in biophysical, biochemical, and behavioral technologies are beginning to turn science fiction into reality. These developments offer exciting possibilities while also raising issues with regard to ethics and responsible use. Cognitive biotechnology is the ability for technology to enhance and improve human thinking, sensing, coordinating, and acting upon the physical and societal environment. With CBT, our effectiveness, normally constrained by the limits of human physiology, can now be extended and augmented by biophysical, biochemical, or bioengineered means. For instance, in the last decade, scientists have accurately melded brain signals with machine interfaces to create mind-controlled prosthetics. Most recently, they have made this flow of information bidirectional, creating prosthetics that can now feel sensation and send these feelings back to the brain. They say if humans can actuate, i.e. put into motion or action, machines, and these machines can in turn actuate humans, then we have moved beyond the confines of our own physiology. Moreover, if these machines are mobile and can interact with our minds at a distance, then we've extended our reach beyond our physical limits. Transcranial direct current stimulation is an example they give. They say that's been shown to regulate the human brain itself, affecting the brain's executive functions, learning mechanisms, memory, language processing, sensory perception, and motor functions. They say the technology also provides for the possibility of raising soldiers' cognitive and physical capabilities to analyze scenarios more easily and quickly, to retain and retrieve memories with greater acuity, to modulate perceptions of pain, to improve psychological self-protection, and to embed muscle memory and motor skills more quickly.
Sounds like super soldier.
Super soldier is exactly what it is, which is, and as you'll see now, so what they're saying is another controversial aspect of this is the potential to look inside the mind of the user to display and play back past memories on an external monitor, or even insert synthetic memories and images into the mind. So they're talking about the use of this for therapeutic.
The lawnmower man.
Yes.
I'm using all these film comparisons.
All this predictive programming from the past. But look, what they're talking about is on one side, making sure that future soldiers don't come out with PTSD and so on, because it's going to attenuate fear, it's going to attenuate feelings of pain and so on, but also creating the robot soldier with the exoskeleton, and the exoskeleton will be able to feed feelings back to the brain and so on.
To the person operating it.
And so the question, Patrick, is who's behind this piece of garbage that's been sent into the NATO review? It is Imperial College and Johns Hopkins University, the two major institutions that are also behind COVID policy. Driving
the pandemic narratives, you could say, Mike.
Yes.
Isn't that interesting? Well, in terms of transhumanism, Imperial College is absolutely a hotbed of that. And, you know, a lot of this is because this is very trendy. There's a lot of money in this, and certainly it attracts a lot of attention from the TED crowd. And certainly the World Economic Forum are very, very interested in this as well. So there's lots of platforms for young people that are getting into this area of technology, Mike, in education and in research as well. So it is very seductive. It attracts a lot of the great minds, the great young minds. But where is it heading exactly? And let's talk about the morals and the ethics behind it. That's usually verboten in this conversation.
It certainly is.
It's all technology-led.
Now, we were talking about the parallels in language being used between coronavirus, COVID-19 policy and environmental policy. Well, here is Sir James Bevan, the CEO of the Environment Agency. And he's absolutely doing that. The climate emergency, he says, is the unseen pandemic. Because left unchecked, it will kill more people and do much more harm than COVID-19. Well, bearing in mind that's possibly true in a sense, since the figures aren't necessarily accurate with COVID-19. But anyway, we'll move on. Let's have a look at this. In the same way we have worked together to tackle COVID-19, it follows we will get the environment we pay for, we will get the climate we work for, and that's why the government is right to be putting so much effort into securing the right outcome at COP26 later in the year. I found that a fascinating attitude. The government is going into COP26 with a right outcome in mind that they need to secure, and they are going to be encouraging, shall we say, all the countries that join them for that conference in Glasgow in November to, in the same way that we did with the G7 with the rapid response mechanism. And if you don't remember this is Theresa May in 2017 or 2018 at the G7 conference, got all the other G7 countries to agree to pursuing common narratives for government policy across all those countries. So, for example, well, she was using Skripal as the example at the time, but I think we've seen that with respect to COVID-19 more recently. A common narrative pursued by everyone. In the case of COP26, the right outcome is going to be pursued.
So James Bibbs is talking about all these climate deaths, okay? Supposed to be one of the top environmentalists in the country. And so other people are saying this too. They're saying that we need to act now because people's lives are at stake. We can't wait, we can't wait. We need to pursue a zero carbon policy. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sounds a lot like zero COVID. Well, behind both zero COVID and zero carbon, you'll find, guess who? There he is again. It's Billy Goats. What does Billy Goats have to say? Bill Gates has a plan to save the world. Will the world listen? This is the question. So he's being absolutely feted by all of these mainstream journalists right now, articles everywhere, interviews. So in the face of one of humanity's greatest challenges, Bill Gates, the Messiah, lays out his plan for attaining net zero carbon emissions. By when? We don't know. Could be 2030, could be 2040, could be 2050, could be 2100, who knows? And why is this? Well, this is because there's a climate crisis, Mike. So the common fallacy or the lie that's being told by all of these people, which has already been thoroughly debunked, if you go and look at the work of Dr. Bjorn Lomborg out of Denmark, this idea that there's all these climate deaths that the UN has been projecting. I mean, even the UN Secretary General quoted some outrageous number, millions of climate deaths. The people who have died from weather events, or what they call climate deaths, okay, has fallen dramatically from 1920 until the present day. An unbelievable fall, almost to nothing. I don't know what the percentage is, but don't quote me on this, but if you go look at Bjorn Lomborg's presentation in Sydney from 1 year ago, it's on YouTube, from 1 year ago, he'll explain this. It's fallen like 90-something%. Okay, so this is absolute canard. Okay, people don't sit there. If the sea levels are rising over 100 or 200 years, people don't just stand there and watch themselves drowned for 20 years. They usually build dikes and things like that. Go ask the people in Holland what they did when the sea levels rose. Well, they kind of adapted, didn't they? Because human beings have this great trait of adaptivity. But you wouldn't know it if you're listening to the climate experts and to Billy Goats. So where does that leave us here? How are you going to make this work? How are you going to make this zero carbon work? Well, we got a clue here, Mike. Deutsche Bank, this is a little bit early. This report came out a few weeks ago, but it's nonetheless relevant. Deutsche Bank admits the EU will need eco-dictatorship to implement its Green New Deal. A senior economist at Deutsche Bank warns that for the EU's own Green New Deal to succeed, a certain degree of eco-dictatorship will be necessary, okay? So they're already talking about this. You see the common thread here, don't you?
Well, they've primed this with COVID dictatorship, and if we think that COVID dictatorship is going to go away, no, it's going to morph into eco-dictatorship.
Zero COVID dictatorship, zero carbon dictatorship. Where's democracy in this? I don't think they're planning to have much democracy in the future. And they're using these two phantoms, these two crises that are happening now, we can't wait, must act now, as the pretext for all of these draconian policies that are going to be dictatorial. They already are dictatorial. Take a look around. No surprise there. But so it's something that we'll be covering more in the future. Now, something interesting happened yesterday, Mike.
Oh, what was that? Has Joe Biden woken up?
Joe Biden got his war on. His advisors woke him up to inform him that the U.S. has bombed Syria, Mike. So again, these are woke bombs. This is the new defense secretary here. They're putting him front and center, of course, because Joe is still with a cup of Ovaltine and his slippers on, putting logs on the fire or something like that in the White House. So here's the new defense minister. The U.S. bombing facilities in Syria by Iran-backed militia. So they're doing this, Mike, apparently to put pressure on the Iranians to get back into the nuclear deal. But wait a minute. It's the U.S. who left the Iran nuclear deal. The Iranians never left it. Everyone else left it but them. So this is a strange sort of strategy that's going on here. Again, this is to isolate Iran. And what does this mean? This means that Syria could be back on the target list. Certainly, we said before the election many times that Joe Biden, the Biden administration, will be an absolute warmongering vehicle for all of the interests that want to reform and reshape politics. in the Middle East, and certainly they're going to be doing the bidding of Israel and other countries in the region, like Saudi Arabia, like the Gulf states, that want to re-destabilize a country like Syria and Iraq as well. So that's back on the table. So there you go. This is Joe Biden's getting his war on.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there for today because we're well over time. Thank you very much for joining us today, Patrick. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back at the same time as usual, 1 p.m. on Monday. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.